Number 9. Moose Jaw Tunnels. For decades, officials in the sleepy Canadian city of Moose Jaw in Saskatchewan denied rumors about the existence of an underground network of tunnels directly beneath the streets. But when part of the city's main street collapsed during the 1970s, it became increasingly difficult to deny that the tunnels were there, so the authorities eventually stopped trying. The subterranean labyrinths were eventually excavated, proving that the senior citizens who claimed to remember them had been speaking the truth all along. Chinese railway workers built the tunnels starting in 1908 as a hiding place from the rampant discrimination they faced for allegedly stealing jobs from white people. Laborers also retreated into the underground complex to avoid the hefty head tax that had been imposed on immigrants who lacked legal status. The system was accessed through the basements of buildings owned by legal Chinese immigrants. It was used for many years, with some of its inhabitants even raising families in it. The tunnels gained a secondary use as a bootlegging hub during the 1920s, when Canada and the US implemented prohibition laws banning the manufacture and sale of alcoholic beverages. During that time, the Chicago mob established a suspiciously regular presence in Moose Jaw. The Chinese immigrants who originally inhabited the tunnels reportedly cooperated with the gangsters, while the local police made arrangements of their own to maintain peace with the mob. In the meantime, the city's mayor took a hands-off approach to the situation entirely. During the Prohibition era, the tunnels housed a seedy underworld of prostitution, gambling, and other vices. Al Capone was rumored to have spent time there, and it was said that he even moved in briefly to avoid capture by the American feds. Today, the network is a tourist attraction that offers historical reenactment and guided tours. At number 8. Moroto Sky Resort. The futuristic-looking new Moroto Sky Resort was conveniently located near the tip of Japan's Cape Moroto Peninsula, which was both scenic and accessible by highway. And while on the island it's on, Shikoku is largely considered by locals to be a sort of hillbilly town, the area is popular among tourists. The new Moroto Sky Resort was likely built during Japan's bubble era, which lasted from roughly 1970 to 1990, and it was characterized by whimsical but not very functional architecture. But with little more than a restaurant, a video game arcade, and 2 viewing platforms offering a glimpse of the area's breathtaking scenery, the modern-looking site was hardly a resort at all. The business closed in 1978 for unknown reasons. Since then, the property has been essentially stripped bare, and the view of its surroundings has been littered with newly constructed towers and other buildings. The site has reportedly fallen even further into ruin after gaining popularity among the urban exploration community and receiving an influx of curious visitors. Despite the construction of at least 3 bridges in the region over the last several decades, the former New Moroto Sky Resort remains isolated and is therefore unlikely to be revived at any point in the near future. Number 7. Ark D0 Bunker. In 1953, Yugoslavian dictator Josip Broz Tito instructed his army to build a secret bunker at the base of a large remote hill to serve as an emergency headquarters for him and members of his inner circle. Located in the town of Konjic, in what now is Bosnia and Herzegovina, it took 26 long years to build and remained a complete secret from the public until the breakup of Yugoslavia during the 1990s. The horseshoe-shaped bunker's official name was Arimska Ratna Komanda, or Ark D0 Complex. It contained over 100 rooms including living quarters, offices, conference rooms, planning rooms, and everything else that was required to sustain a small population and enable the continuance of government during a nuclear war. There were 2 kitchens, 5 bathrooms, access to cable TV, a cryptography center, a hospital operating room, and a communications station. The bunker was built to sustain a 20-kiloton nuclear blast and was stocked to keep 350 people alive for 6 months. It was climate-controlled and had its own water and electrical systems, along with backup systems in case of a failure. Tito died in 1980, just a year after construction was finished, and the bunker was maintained but not used. During the Bosnian War, it served as a supply base. At one point, there were plans to blow it up, but someone rigged the wiring. Today, the site remains preserved in its original state, making it one of few Yugoslavian landmarks that remain undestroyed. Number 6. Peter Grant Mansion. Canada's largest house is an unfinished 65,000 square foot mansion in northern Ontario. Construction started in 2005. It was supposed to be the dream home and corporate office of multi-millionaire lumber tycoon Peter Grant. The original plans called for the installation of an art gallery, waterfalls, a golf course, a squash court, and other luxurious amenities. The sprawling estate features 2 elevators, an observation lighthouse, an indoor pool, a huge jacuzzi, 2 30-foot fireplaces, and a boathouse with enough space to house a 40-foot yacht. Grant ran into financial difficulties when the lumber industry took a downturn in 2007, followed by the 2008 global recession. Construction on the home stopped that year and never resumed, leaving it with plywood floors, unfinished walls, and incomplete wiring. The house has also been vandalized repeatedly. It would reportedly cost just $1 million to complete the mansion, but it sits derelict and fenced off on the shore of Temiskaming, with no trespassing signs dotting the perimeter. The decaying property more closely resembles a derelict industrial facility than an actual home. A Toronto-based company bought the mansion for $25 million but has done little with it, leaving locals frustrated as it becomes an even bigger eyesore with time. In 2021, the Daily Mail reported that it's unclear who the mansion's current owners are, but they allegedly haven't paid property taxes in 3 years and seem to have no clear plans for the property. What should happen to the property? Should someone finish construction, or should it just be torn down? Tell us what you think in the comments below and hit subscribe while you're at it. Number 5. Sealand. Great Britain's Thames and Mersey estuaries are home to a series of decaying towers known as the Mansell Sea Forts. Built in 1942, these seemingly out-of-place structures were used by the British Army and Navy to protect vital shipping lanes from the Germans during World War II. The forts were built offshore before being sunk into place. Each Navy fort had 7 floors and housed 120 sailors. The Army forts, on the other hand, looked a bit different. They were constructed in groups in a futuristic architectural style and were often connected by walkways. The Mansell forts were decommissioned and abandoned during the 1950s. Over the following decades, several of them were occupied and repurposed by pirate radio broadcasters, but most were eventually left behind, and although the forts still stand today, they're mostly unusable due to their state of decay. One exception is the so-called Principality of Sealand, a self-proclaimed state that declared its independence in 1967 after a man named Paddy Roy Bates moved there to air his pirate radio station. Located off the Essex coast, roughly 7.5 miles from the nearest land, the site was originally known as HM Fort Ruffs. Bates named himself the Prince of Sealand, and his wife became Princess Joan. In addition to having a royal hierarchy, Sealand also has its own flag and currency. And while the British government does not recognize the micronation's sovereignty, it also doesn't go out of its way to interfere with the goings-on there. Sealand consists of a north and south tower. Inside the north tower, there's a gym, a chapel, and a jail cell. Bates once held an invading German intruder in the jail cell for 3 months, releasing him only after a diplomat was sent to negotiate his return. There's also a fully functioning living quarters including bedrooms, bathrooms, a kitchen, and other spaces that were once used by the 50 or so people that lived in Sealand when its population peaked during the 1970s. Today, the fort remains under the care of Bates' son and the current prince, Michael. Although he no longer lives there full-time, his grown children are also heavily involved in Sealand's operations and upkeep. Number 4. Campanopolis. Outside Buenos Aires, there's a whimsical Willy Wonka-like collection of buildings known as Campanopolis. At first, it seems like a deserted village, but these cartoon-like distorted structures were never lived in. An eccentric millionaire named Antonio Campana bought the land with the intention of farming it shortly before Argentina entered a dismal period of dictatorship and oppression. During that period, the government seized his property and used it as a dump, bringing Campana's vision to an abrupt halt. He sued the government and, surprisingly, he won. After clearing 70 million cubic feet of garbage, Campana realized the land was useless for farming. Using some of the junk that the government left behind for him to clean, Antonio built Campanopolis in the 1980s. He planted trees, bringing wildlife back to the barren plot, and over the years his Dr. Seuss-like Fantasyland continued to grow. The site remains open to visitors today. At number 3, MusleYovo. During the 1950s, one of Russia's biggest dumping grounds for radioactive waste was located along the banks of the Teka River in the Ural Mountains. Billions of cubic feet of hazardous material were dumped into the river known as the Mayak nuclear complex. In 1957, a toxic explosion at Mayak released massive amounts of radioactivity into the atmosphere. The disaster affected as many as 270,000 people, but the government didn't bother to tell most of them. Some residents were relocated right away, while others were left to carry on with their lives as usual, unaware that they were inhaling copious amounts of radioactive toxins. The disaster finally became public knowledge when the Soviet Union collapsed during the early 1990s. In 2009, more than 50 years after the accident, residents of the hardest-hit village MusleYovo were given the choice to either relocate or receive a $30,000 payout. But many who chose the payout claimed that they'd never received it, while others were just swindled by crooked real estate agents. Villagers who opted to relocate were moved just a mile down the road, where their new settlement, Novo MusleYovo, remains well within the contaminated zone. Most of the homes in the old village were destroyed, while others were disassembled and moved to the new village. But some buildings remain, including an abandoned school. A handful of remaining residents, mostly belonging to the Tatar ethnic group, are stuck living in what's left of the community because they allegedly lack the proper documents to qualify for help with relocating. The nuclear plant still operates today, and many believe that it continues to dump hazardous waste into the river. Residents of both the new and old MusleYovo are plagued by health problems from radiation. When Radio Free Europe journalists visited the area and snapped photos, they were confronted by police, who made it clear that they were unwelcome. It seems as though the government remains intent on keeping the far-reaching effects of the Mayak disaster as quiet as possible. Number 2. JFK's Tropical Bunker. Starting 1960, the U.S. Navy Seabees got to work building a top-secret nuclear bunker for then-President John F. Kennedy near his Palm Beach winter home. Located on Florida's Peanut Island, its official name was the Detachment Hotel. Unlike the typical sprawling Cold War-era bunkers that were designed for the country's leaders and top officials, JFK's fallout shelter was incredibly small. Contained within its cramped confines were 15 bunk beds, a simple communication center, a desk, a conference table, and an escape hatch leading to a helipad. The bunker was stocked with enough food and other necessities to last the president and up to 30 others for a month at the most. The detachment hotel was never used, and it fell into neglect after Kennedy's assassination in 1963. 11 years later, the government finally acknowledged the site's existence, and it's been under the care of the Palm Beach Maritime Museum since 1995. Spokesperson Anthony Miller told VisitFlorida.com that the bunker would have never withstood a direct hit, and it was intended as a temporary fallout shelter to wait until rescue arrived. It underwent extensive renovations in recent years and welcomes around 12,000 visitors annually. At number 1, the Green Line. The Mediterranean island nation of Cyprus is divided by a UN-controlled buffer zone that keeps ethnic Greeks in the south and ethnic Turks in the north. Sometimes called the Green Line, this demilitarized zone was implemented in 1974 after Turkey invaded Cyprus. It stretches 112 miles across the island, measuring 11 feet wide at its narrowest point and 4.6 miles at its widest. Most of the buffer zone is heavily restricted, allowing only military and UN personnel to enter. For nearly half a century, it has sat mostly untouched and frozen in time. In the capital city of Nicosia, a decaying passenger jet sits outside the abandoned airport. Rusting vintage cars remain parked in lots as if they're still waiting to be sold or for their owners to get in them and drive away. Old stores and cafes line the empty streets, and once bustling commercial buildings are quietly falling apart. There are other areas along the buffered zone that are inhabited, as well as several crossing points between the north and south, which were opened in recent years amid cooling tensions between ethnic Greeks and Turks. But there are still many complicated issues to sort out, and for now, the buffer zone remains frozen in time.
4. Panthermobile. After decades of obscurity, the Panthermobile appeared at an auction a few years ago. It was specifically built to appear in the opening credits of the iconic cartoon series The Pink Panther, and since then has had extensive restoration work done thanks to its new owners. The unique Panthermobile is 23 feet long and 6 feet wide, and it was sculpted from sheet metal using a 1960s Oldsmobile Tornado chassis. Because the driver's seat is outside the car itself, the driver is required to wear a helmet. The space-age style and two-piece clamshell doors ooze vintage 1970s flair for the all-pink car. The inside is filled with shag reclining seats and pink fuzzy cushions where passengers can unwind while sipping on champagne or talking on the retro 1970s car phone. The driver can even see behind the car thanks to a backup camera and tiny black and white TV. Even if the vehicle was always working, as you can see in the series opening, it's likely that it was never actually registered since it was not fully authorized. Its pointed front, which is exceedingly attractive, lacks impact-absorbing elements, and its specific construction does not fulfill current safety regulations for the road. Despite being a unique and recognizable phenomenon, there are some sources for the Panthermobile that are still a little unclear. It was auctioned off in 2007 by J. Orberg, the designer of some of the most well-known cars in cinema and television, including KITT, the DeLorean from Back to the Future, the General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard, and the infamous Batmobile from 1966 and 1989. Despite what most people might think, Orberg didn't design the Panthermobile. In reality, the bright pink custom car, the world's most flamboyant vehicle, was made by Ed Newton in 1969 at Bob Reisner California Show Cars, with the help of Bill Honda, Bill Hines, Dan Woods, and Joe Balon. The front-wheel drive car was bought by Los Angeles-based Galpin Autosports, a prominent seller of 1970s custom cars, at a British auction back in 2011. Before that, it simply sat in a garage the entire time. It was truly terrible. The Oldsmobile's 7.0-litre engine didn't start. The outside had been painted over several times, and the inside had been damaged with cheap repairs. Dave Shooter was given the brunt of the repair work, and he got started as soon as possible. It took some time because he called upon Joe Perez, who was 90 at that time and was the original upholsterer of the Panthermobile. According to Bo Boakman, president of Galpin Motors, it may look cool, but the pink Panthermobile is the world's worst car to drive. The gas and brake pedals are not where they're supposed to be. There's no power steering and the steering wheel barely turns. But it is a great car to be driven around in, I have to say. Would you take it out for a spin? 3. Taly Air Strip. The South Pacific is littered with World War II artifacts everywhere you look. Under some small towns, there's a network of military tunnels. Underwater, covered with coral, lie sunken planes and equipment. More undiscovered wartime relics, including a deserted airstrip, are hidden inside dense forests. Taly was designed as a small landing strip and built by the Australian Army. During World War II, both the Japanese and Americans were consistently exchanging hands as they simultaneously occupied Taly. Near the end of the war, it ended up being used as an emergency landing strip since it was unable to accommodate fighter planes. The landing strip had its last active moments in early September 1944. A US B-25H bomber took off from Sterling Island on September 3, 1944, with the mission of destroying any surviving Japanese ships off the southern coast of Great Britain. Although the operation was ultimately successful, the B-25H aircraft experienced some engine issues, so the pilot decided to make an emergency landing at Taly Island instead of taking a chance on the long journey back to base. A Lockheed Ventura was sent out on a similar mission to target a Japanese-occupied airport close to Rabaul less than a week later. Although the Lockheed's mission was successful, one of its engines also failed on the flight back. The crew decided to land at Taly as well, since they knew their aircraft wouldn't be able to return to base. The airfield at Taly was shut down not long after the war wrapped up. In the 1960s, palm oil plantations grew everywhere around the landing strip, and nature slowly encroached on the area around the planes. In comparison to its past runway grandeur, the airport is hardly recognizable now. But the B-25 aircraft and Lockheed remain in their last resting places, leaving behind traces of the country's turbulent past. You can approach the B-25H bomber, which is sitting on its undercarriage on top of thick vegetation, by exploring through the overgrown jungle on foot. The Lockheed Ventura is only a few yards to the west. you can still go inside the plant-filled undercarriage and visualize the cramped areas where the pilots and crew would have once sat during wartime. The Allied star, which is lying on its side, is now barely visible. Have you ever seen an abandoned plane in person? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe. 2. Motorcycle Graveyard. There are so many amazing abandoned spots in New York, many of which are said to be haunted, holding the spirit of lingering ghosts. But beyond the city of Lockport, there's a graveyard full of historical artifacts that will leave you speechless. The Motorcycle Graveyard of Lockport, found within a warehouse built sometime in the 1800s, was once home to a successful company. The warehouse was finished in 1875, according to official city records, but the hand-cut canal stone used in its construction suggests it may have been done much earlier. The building, which is more than 53,000 square feet in size, had long been hidden in plain sight, with onlookers unaware of the marvels rotting away inside. The warehouse became known as Coal Cycle Sales in the 1970s. Cole had been collecting bikes and other scrap metal for more than 50 years, which was once a booming business. Frank Morrill, the last owner to actually maintain the warehouse, purchased the property from Cole sometime in 1997. Frank kept operating the company under the name Cole Cycle Salvage, selling several of the motorbikes still in the warehouse. Regrettably, Frank had to shut down the business sometime around 2007. The motorcycle-filled, abandoned building overlooking the Erie Canal started to deteriorate very rapidly. Within a couple of years after Frank closed up shop, the city of Lockport eventually possessed the building. Vandals frequented the warehouse, which came to be commonly known as the Motorcycle Graveyard. The building was allegedly slated to be completely demolished in 2011, but because of the complications with the State Historic Preservation Office, it never happened. According to them, the site had great historical value and should be kept preserved. Sadly, a bunch of teens set fire to the property in 2013. Although many locals tried to visit the motorcycle warehouse over the years it sat empty, the history that was still within the building was lost forever in the July 2013 fire. People who thought the building had a rich history say that New York would never again be home to an industrial cemetery like this one. The majority of the motorcycles and scrap metal still inside the structure belong to bikes dating back to the 1960s and 70s. 1. Bus 142. In the heart of the Alaskan wilderness, a bus that's been abandoned for years was rediscovered in 1992 by two moose hunters. And inside, they found the body of 24-year-old Chris McCandless, a wanderer who'd left his former life to live off the grid in Alaska, inside the rusting, overgrown bus. The Stampede Trail bus, known as Bus 142, the Magic Bus, and the Into the Wild bus, has attracted tourists from all over the world and has turned into a symbol that's both admired and controversial. The vehicle is a 1940s original International Harvester that once served the Fairbanks City Transit system. After being decommissioned, it was stripped of its engine and turned into a temporary shelter after being purchased by the Utah Construction Company. They set up a wood stove and sleeping accommodations for their men assigned to developing access for trucks transporting ore from nearby mines. Utah Construction abandoned the bus when the project was finished in 1961. It remained hidden away in its secluded forest site outside of Denali National Park for the next 60 years, serving as a haven and shelter for hunters and backcountry travelers. A guest book, maps, provisions for survival, and messages etched into the bus's interior were among some souvenirs that the bus picked up from visitors over the years. After the terrible death of Chris McCandless, famous author John Krakauer wrote about the 24-year-old getting lost in the Alaskan wilderness. In his 1996 book Into the Wild, he included all of his findings. Krakauer spent years reading through Chris's journals, speaking with his family, and even hiking the same route Chris had once taken years before, in order to learn as much as he could about the man. He went to the same spots and set up interviews with several of Chris's former acquaintances, associates, and witnesses. Actor and director Sean Penn made it into an award-winning film, also called Into the Wild, back in 2007. The Into the Wild bus is extensively featured in the movie and McCandless's final images, and it's come to represent his life-changing journey. As a result, countless people were so affected by the story that they started to hike to the location of the bus and kept doing so for years to come. Locals began to call the visitors McCandless pilgrims because of the alarming number that arrived each year, which easily reached 100 or so. Several people have gotten lost, suffered injuries, and even died while trying to follow the young drifters' route to the infamous bus. The first case of a hiker dying while en route to the vehicle was reported in 2010. Claire Ackerman, a 24-year-old Swiss lady, died while trying to cross the Teklanika River, which once stopped McCandless from returning home. Ackerman had been trekking with a hiking pal who told authorities that the bus, which happened to be across the river, was not where they were originally headed. Despite the fact that most had happier outcomes than Ackerman, pilgrims continued to arrive even after word of her death spread. In 2013, 2 significant rescue operations took place. 3 hikers from Germany had to be saved in May 2019. 3 other travelers were evacuated by a passing military helicopter a month later. And the most recent rescue was when 5 Italian hikers were rescued by Alaska State Troopers in February 2020, and one of them had potentially fatal frostbite. Between 2009 and 2017, a total of 15 search and rescue operations were performed by the state. And after the latest death, locals had enough. It was obvious that the bus was important to many people, but since it was drawing people into risky circumstances, it was evident that something needed to be done. There were some that thought building a bridge across the river would fix the situation, making it safer to cross. Others, though, wanted the bus to be moved to a spot that could not be accessed. Regardless of either opinion, the one thing that cannot be denied is that Into the Wild started an obsession for people around the world. In order to stop hikers from putting their own safety in jeopardy while trying to visit the famous bus shelter, the Army National Guard had it transported to a safer site on June 18, 2020. The military and Veterans Affairs, Natural Resources, and Transportation Agencies of Alaska worked together on this project. It was appropriately named Operation Utah, after the company that was first responsible for leaving the bus behind. The 207th AVN pilots, flight engineers, crew chiefs, and mechanics arrived by UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter under the direction of the DNR to remove trees and obstructions as well as guarantee a secure rigging procedure for the bus. Finally, 12 men from Alaska's Army National Guard's 1st Battalion, 207th Aviation Regiment lifted the abandoned vehicle to a safe location in cooperation with the Department of Natural Resources. The National Guard released a statement saying that their removal team put together a suitcase and secured it inside the bus to ensure safe travel. The contents inside were of sentimental value to the McCandless family. After the removal, discussions on what to do next with the bus began. It was announced that it would be rehomed to the University of Alaska's Museum of the North. The museum later declared that they planned to build an outdoor display with it. The goal was to help travelers visit the bus safely. At the time of the removal, Alaska's Department of National Resources released a statement saying, "We encourage people to enjoy Alaska's wild areas safely, and we understand the hold this bus has had on the popular imagination. However, this is an abandoned and deteriorating vehicle that was requiring dangerous and costly rescue efforts, but more importantly, was costing some visitors their lives. I'm glad we found a safe, respectful, and economical solution to this situation." 8. The lost continent of Zeelandia. Many people have accepted that there's only 7 continents that exist on our planet, but there's really an 8th continent hiding 2/3 of a mile under the sea. Zeelandia was only confirmed to be a new continent in 2016. However, in recent years, scientists have been able to carry out more research on this sunken landmass. By sending down deep-water drills, researchers from the International Ocean Discovery Program were able to collect 8,200 feet of sediment to analyze. Using these samples, the research team was able to find out a lot of information regarding Zeelandia's history over the last 70 million years. As they studied the fossil life in the sediment samples, researchers were able to put together a picture of the creatures that would have called Zeelandia home. They also discovered that at one point this continent existed above the waves. But why did it end up underwater? Around 40 to 50 million years ago, the Pacific Ring of Fire was formed. This dramatic-sounding natural phenomenon was situated at the edge of the Pacific Ocean and caused massive increases in volcanic activity and also contributed to a rise in sea level. These would have been the main reasons for Zeelandia sinking, but many scientists think that this process would have started 40 million years earlier than the Pacific Ring of Fire. It would have started to lower and sink when the continent split from Australia and Antarctica 80 million years ago. Hopefully, this newly discovered continent can help scientists understand a variety of subjects. Not only does it rewrite the understanding of how certain species may have evolved, but using the geological data, we can also better understand the effects of climate change and other natural events such as tectonic plate movement. 7. The San Jose. The ship known as the San Jose has been called the Holy Grail of shipwrecks, and for very good reason. The 16th century warship was rediscovered off the coast of Cartagena, Colombia in 2015 by scientists from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. However, the find was so monumental that they had to keep the information secret for 3 years, and it wasn't released to the public until 2018. They were waiting to get government approval since the ship's cargo would be worth over $17 billion today. The San Jose was part of a Spanish fleet making its way from Panama to Colombia. The vessel was full of gold, silver, and emeralds from the mines of Potosi in Peru. Unfortunately, the ship ended up getting into a battle with the British Navy on the way to its destination. During this time, the two countries were not on good terms, and they were in the midst of the War of the Spanish Succession. The British sank the San Jose on June 8, 1708, and neither side was able to recover any of the precious cargo before it slipped beneath the waves. This led to the loss of an incredible amount of gold and other valuable materials, and consequently, merchants both in Europe and the New World of the Americas faced financial hardships. Using an underwater machine called Remus 6000, scientists managed to capture images of the seabed where they believed the San Jose had capsized. The team discovered bronze cannons laying in the sand with dolphin motifs engraved on them, something the Spanish ship was known for. This allowed them to positively identify the shipwreck as the San Jose. Today, we know the general area where the ship was found, but its exact location is still under wraps to protect it from treasure seekers. Since the vessel's initial discovery, various governments have discussed what to do with the wealth the wreck provides. But according to the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, the artifacts will be added to a museum in order to publicly display and preserve the San Jose's contents. 6. Thonis Heracleon. Thonis Heracleon was an ancient city and was of great importance to the Egyptian people. At one time, it was the main port of entry into Egypt by sea for people coming from Greek waters up until 331 BC, when the city of Alexandria was founded. However, even though it's considered to be one of the most notable ancient civilizations, Thonis Heracleon wasn't really known at all by historians. The only records left of this city were uncovered in rare archaeological finds, or it was referenced in classical texts. Any mentions of the place are few and far between, leading many to speculate that the city was, in fact, a mythical location. In 2000, researchers from the European Institute for Underwater Archaeology, IEASM, led by Frank Goddio, made a breakthrough. Not only were they able to find astounding artifacts, including grand statues and evidence of the infamous Temple of Amun, but they were also able to solve another mystery. It was previously believed that Thonis and Heracleon were two different cities, but what Goddio and his team discovered was that they were actually the same place. We now know that this ancient city was a bustling port, with many anchors being uncovered as well as evidence of 79 shipwrecks. Thonis Heracleon was a place of trade and commerce, with coins and currency being unearthed from the seabed. In addition, the city was a location of spiritual importance, being home to the Temple of Amun and the Temple of Hercules. The ceremony dedicated to the rebirth of Osiris, one of the main gods in the Egyptian pantheon, was also celebrated here. The site is found off of Abukir Bay in Egypt, around 4 miles from the shore. At the moment, there's no way to know for sure why Thonis Heracleon ended up a sunken city, but many believe it was due to a catastrophic natural event. We may, in time, be able to find out the true reasons, but it's been 22 years since its initial discovery, and experts have only managed to survey around 5% of the city. 5. Bimini Road. Bimini Road is located in the Bahamas and can be seen under the water as a formation of rectangular limestone blocks, which has led many to theorize about its origins. Found just off the coast of North Bimini Island, the road stretches for about half a mile. The blocks that make up the road are between 10 and 13 feet long and would have originally been cut into rectangular shapes, although their edges have since been rounded by the water. The road ends in a swirling hook formation of stones, and there's evidence of smaller, shorter roads nearby. It was so well built that when it was discovered in 1968 by archaeologists Joseph Manson Valentine, Jacques Mayol, and Robert Angove, they originally thought it was one long joined stone pavement. It was only upon closer inspection that they were able to confirm that it was made of smaller slabs of limestone laid next to each other. Due to the construction and layout of Bini Road, it seemed unlikely that it was part of a natural phenomenon, which led to the theory that it was man-made. But who exactly had constructed it? Many people believe that Bini Road is the real path to Atlantis, the mythical city that sank beneath the waves and is featured in many tales and legends. In 1938, the American mystic Edgar Cayce also prophesied 30 years before its discovery that a road to Atlantis would be found. Cayce was rather specific in his prediction in not only the year but also the location of the ruins. He stated that Atlantis would be discovered under the slime of ages and seawater near Bimini, and that this would happen in 68 or 69. In contrast to Cayce's belief, carbon dating in recent years seems to suggest that the limestone is just part of a natural formation, and no other artifacts other than the road have been unearthed from the seabed. Do you think Bimini Road is evidence of Atlantis or a natural phenomenon? Let us know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. 4. Atlit Yam. On the Carmel coastline of Israel, archaeologists made a groundbreaking underwater discovery of a Neolithic settlement called Atlit Yam. The architecture and structures that can be found at the sunken village have been dated to be between 8,900 and 8,300 years old. Researchers were able to estimate the age of the site using radiocarbon dating technologies. According to historians that explored the site, the people that lived at Atlit Yam weren't all that primitive. They discovered foundations of rectangular buildings, stone walls, paved areas, and wells dug into the ground. It's likely that the residents who once lived here kept domestic animals for food, as there was evidence of remains of sheep, pigs, cattle, and even dogs. This wouldn't have been their only food source though, especially since Atlit Yam would have been close to the sea when it was above water. Over 6,000 fish bones were also found at the site, with many of them belonging to the grey triggerfish. Researchers discovered 65 human remains, and 4 of them showed evidence of a condition called auditory exostosis, which is mainly caused by diving in cold water. This suggests that the settlers would have dived for the fish in order to catch them. It's also likely that the people who lived here farmed crops, since domesticated versions of grain such as wheat, barley, lentils, and flax were also discovered. With all of this taken into consideration, archaeologists believe that Atlit Yam is the earliest example of such a settlement ever seen before on the Levantine coast. 3. C130 Hercules. A new dive site in Aqaba, Jordan, located on the Red Sea, will allow divers to find a treasure trove of rare and unusual vehicles sitting on the seafloor. One of the attractions that can be found here is a massive Lockheed C130 Hercules transport plane. The aircraft measures 98 feet long and has a wingspan of 131 feet, so it's not exactly a small find on the seabed. The Hercules is also resting at a shallow depth of 52 feet under the water, and thanks to the visibility of the Red Sea, it can easily be seen from the surface. But why is the plane here in the first place? The C-130 was intentionally sunk on November 16, 2017, with various government officials in attendance. The aircraft was part of a plan to form a new artificial reef in Aqaba, not only to increase tourism in the area, but also to promote the growth of local marine life as well. Divers that visit the site can swim around the massive frame of the aircraft and move through its cavernous cargo hold. Many scuba divers find the sight of a plane under the water to be incredibly surreal, especially one as big as the C-130 Hercules. Some have even straddled the nose of the aircraft to truly understand just how small they are in comparison. Visitors that are brave enough to swim inside the aircraft can also take pictures with the pilot, a fake skeleton dressed in a uniform that's been placed at the controls. 2. MV Hephaestus. The MV Hephaestus was an oil tanker that was registered to the West African nation of Togo. The vessel measured 196 feet in length and was sailing near the Maltese island of Gozo when a storm started to roll in. The captain decided that he and his crew would drop anchor and try to wait out the storm before continuing on their journey. However, this decision would prove costly, as the storm was not only intense, but MV Hephaestus had also been suffering from engine problems before she encountered the bad weather. On February 10, 2018, the force of the storm began to move the oil tanker closer and closer to shore. Due to the small amount of power left in the engine, the crew could do little to battle against the currents, until eventually it ran aground on the rocks near Isika Ibajda. Thankfully, the crew was unharmed from the collision, and the ship wasn't carrying any cargo at the time, so an environmental tragedy such as an oil spill was avoided. 6 months later, after some essential repairs were made to the ship in order to keep it afloat, 2 tugboats managed to escort MV Hephaestus to the master shipyard on August 15th. Once the vessel arrived at its destination, the full scale of the damage could be assessed. Unfortunately for the owners of the ship, the repairs would be far too expensive, and so the decision was made that she would be scuttled. After being painstakingly cleaned and prepared to be sunk, on August 19, 2022, MV Hephaestus would make her final journey to Zat-e-Amar. The ship now lies upright on the seabed and is a popular spot with divers exploring the area. 1. HMS Stubbor. HMS Stubbor is a wrecked submarine that can be found on the seafloor about 2 miles away from Quara Point in Malta. The S-class submarine was launched on November 11, 1942, entering service for the British Royal Navy in the midst of the Second World War. HMS Stubbor was large, highly armored and powerful, so she was considered the top of her fleet, many of which were built during the 1930s. She was equipped with 13 torpedoes, with each one weighing over 3,500 pounds, measuring 21 feet long and delivering a massive 750-pound payload of explosives. HMS Stubbor mainly patrolled the waters off the coast of Scandinavia, although she also served in the Pacific Far East during the war. Her military career was not without its challenges, and she did take a number of hits leading to considerable damage. However, this wasn't enough to beat the submarine, and she made it through to the end of the war. HMS Stubbor was purposefully scuttled by the British Royal Navy to be used as sonar practice for other submarines a year after the Second World War ended on April 30, 1946. She now lies 1.8 miles off the shore of St. Paul's Bay in Malta, at a depth of 187 feet. Which one of these underwater discoveries fascinated you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye!